Lori Roy is a two-time Edgar Award-winning author. I have been a fan since her very first book. Her latest book, Lake County, is really bold, and it's a new direction for Lori, putting an icon, Marilyn Monroe, into a fictionalized story and changing the trajectory of her life. And I cannot wait to talk about this. Lori, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I am so glad to have you back here. All right, so you put an icon, yes, Marilyn Monroe, in your Southern Gothic crime stories. First of all, what a brave decision.
Yes, and I was uncertain about it for a good while as I was doing the writing. I knew I was going to have a character like Marilyn in the book, and then it struck me, what if it were Marilyn? And so I just had to give it a shot. I started writing, and I thought, if there's a reason why it has to be Marilyn Monroe, if she has something to say, then that means she wants in the book. And right away, almost from the first page, she was saying, hell yes, I got something to say.
Did you get any pushback from anybody, like an editor or publisher or somebody that said, Marilyn Monroe, we already know everything about Marilyn?
You know, I didn't. That's the first time I've been asked that question. The editor who read the book, that was never even broached as an issue.
The setting and the mood is vital to this story, and Lake County is real. It is a real place in Florida. The town of Hochta is your creation. So tell me what it is that you created.
So Lake County, I really came to learn a lot about Lake County through the work of Gilbert King, which a lot of Florida readers will know. Gilbert's written nonfiction work set in Lake County and explores a lot about the 50s and 60s in that part of Florida. So I had done a great deal of research there myself. I had traveled a lot of Lake County, and so Hochta was just sort of an amalgamation of the feel of several places that I went. It was very loose, I guess, my creation.
Anybody that reads your books understands the feel, because setting to your books is integral to the plot, as it is here. It's Southern Gothic crime fiction. What is it exactly about small towns that you gravitate to?
You know, that's a tough question. And it's kind of one of those, in a way, you don't want to think too much about it because you don't want to talk yourself out of something that has a good reason. But the thing about a small town, especially for a young woman like my main character who feels she doesn't fit in. If you don't fit in a small town, there is nowhere to hide. And so, of course, that ups the stakes. That ups her desire to escape the small town. And life is just, it's closer to the earth almost, a little simpler.
It's simple, and your books are gritty. And
I love a gritty setting.
Yeah, you do.
I do, yes, that's the perfect word.
To illustrate what a master you are in this Southern Gothic genre, I would love to hear if you could read just a little passage for us. And you can set it up. We're going to talk about Addie, and this is
okay,
her story.
Yes, so I'll read just a short paragraph telling us a little bit about Addie. Here, I thought I wasn't going to have to wear my readers to do this, but I'm going to break them out. Addie Anne has just turned 18, and she comes from a great family. She loves her mother, she loves her father, but she doesn't want to be her mother. And she has dreams of following her very famous aunt, Aunt Jean, who is known to the rest of the world as Marilyn Monroe. She wants to follow Jean to a career in the movies. So this is a little bit about Addie Anne. As I took long, purposeful strides across the tile floor, my footsteps ringing out, I imagined the director was angry at me for being late to the set. He shouted my name over and over. Addie Anne Buckley to the stage. Where the hell is Addie Anne Buckley? The store's overhead lights flickered as if a camera crew were setting up for the next shot. I smoothed my hair and tucked my blouse neatly into my skirt. Once I reached the magazine rack near the back of the store, I glanced down to make sure I'd hit my imaginary mark. So that's Addie is in the little town grocery store, small town grocery store with her Aunt Jean, and she plays these imaginary games because Aunt Jean told her everywhere should be your stage. And so she's marching through the grocery store, the overhead lights flickering, imagining like the cameras I'm seeing here. And that's been her dream since she was 10 years old. She's been studying to become like Marilyn Monroe.
And she is promised something by her aunt, Jean,
Yes.
Marilyn Monroe. The timeline is the 1950s. Laurie, I know you were not around in the 1950s. So where did you do your research? Because there's so many elements in this book that are spot on.
Well, thank you for that. Back when I was in college, I had this, for whatever reason, interest in the era, the 1950s, and I read a whole bunch of biographies, Marilyn Monroe, the Rat Pack, the organized crime of the time, political figures of the time. So I had a lot of that in the bank, just general knowledge. I did quite a bit of reading of Ace Atkins' work. Ace he was a reporter for the Tampa Bay, I guess, Tribune is what it was back in the day. And he did a great deal of reporting on Charlie Wall, who was a figure in the book. Charlie Wall was a real-life gangster, the grandfather of organized crime in Florida, in fact. And so I read a lot of Ace's work and a lot of research in Lake County at the time, like the orange groves back then were much different than they are now. And so it's just sinking into that research and then finding the characters that bring it to life.
In the book, as we said, it's the 1950s. Marilyn Monroe has just finished filming The 7-Year Itch. And that, for people who maybe have not seen the movie, that's that famous where she's standing over the subway grate in the white dress. This is a low point in her life. And in the book, she goes back to Hochta. Now, we're not going to give anything away, but why is she going back?
So Marilyn's connection to this small town is Addie Anne, who I was just reading about. Addie Anne's mother and Marilyn Monroe, when she was Norma Jean, they grew up together in the Los Angeles system, as they were both orphaned, or not orphaned, but they were in the system together. And so that's the connection. This family is Marilyn's pseudo family. It's not her real family. And ever since she was 19, when she's had a low point in her life, a struggle for some reason, she comes back to this small town. And it's the one place in the world, and this is what I wanted to give her, the one place in the world where she is just Norma Jean. And she's called Aunt Jean or Jean. It's like the collective town is in on it, so to speak. But that's just what she's always been. So in this instance, at the point in time when the book begins, Marilyn has come back because that photograph has come out. And she was married to Joe DiMaggio at the time, and Joe DiMaggio did not like that photograph. She was criticized widely for it. She loved the photograph. And that criticism brings on this kind of low point in her life. And she comes back home to Hochta to heal. And that's where the book begins.
The backstory is so clever. It's told by Addie Anne Buckley, who is the 18-year-old niece. And Addie's struggle is interesting. She is a teenage girl. She feels like she wants more. She adores her mother, but she doesn't want to be her mother. She wants what Aunt Jean is and has. Was she a complicated character to write?
Addie Anne?
Yes.
You know, she really wasn't. I think Addie had a lot of the feelings that I think many young women come up with. She had that awkward stage where she was kind of taller than the other girls, and she had the big feet, which, you know, and just didn't feel like she fit in. And that was her struggle. And so her way out was to follow Aunt Jean to what felt like a very glamorous, amazing life, seeing this huge world beyond Hakta. And seeing the world her mother lived, she saw that as very small. And so knowing that about her, and that's such an important thing about coming up with your characters, and I'm kind of reminding myself of this as I sit here and I'm thinking about a new book. You got to know what they want. And what you want is that thing deep inside that just burns.
And we feel that from Addie. And it's not just because she has this glamorous family member, but they're an 18-year-old girl. No matter who they are yearning for something.
Yes, yes. She's yearning for a bigger life. And she thinks she knows what that is.
We talked about organized crime a couple minutes ago, but there was the Tampa Bay Mafia, there was gambling, there was bolita, which I was not familiar with, but you explained that gambling game pretty well.
Yes.
And the character of Charlie Wall. There was a whole mafia scene, and it's important in the story.
Yes. So that, when I decided, so Addie Anne has a boyfriend, Truett, and I wanted Truett, he needed to be making a living somehow. And when I decided on Truett was going to be running his own little bolita game. And for those who don't know, bolita is kind of the precursor to the lottery. It's a game.
But it's illegal.
But it's illegal. And it is even more so that the mob runs bolita. So Truett's running this small town game in Lake County under the nose of the mafia. So once I knew that, once I knew he's running this bolita game, I'm like, well, that means he's got to have a showdown with a mob boss, right? I mean, that's the inevitable clash that he's destined for, and that was intimidating to me to think about writing a gangster. That's just not really in my strike zone, so to speak.
And a gangster who was a real person.
Yes, and then because Charlie Wall is also, and Charlie Wall, like Marilyn, is a real person and a very big personality. And so Charlie, as with Marilyn, in as much as possible, I stuck to the truth of them. You know, Charlie Wall wore these white, I think they were linen suits and a hat, and he would flip coins and he'd give candy and money to the kids, and he was a big talker. He loved to tell stories and he loved attention. And I think ultimately in real life, Charlie Wall was murdered over 50 years ago in Tampa, which remains unsolved. So in as much as possible, I stuck to who they were. And I don't know that I'd try it again because it went so well this time. I feel like I just sort of got lucky.
I'm not sure about that. I think you've got that one nailed. Lori, there are powerful men in this book, quite a few. But more interesting to me was the strength of the women, considering the place, considering the era. And the one who stands out to me the most is Addie's mother, Inez. Talk a little about her, if you would.
I will. I so appreciate you raising the issue of the difference between power and strength, because that wasn't brought up or discussed a lot as the book came out in reviews and whatnot, and that really is the heart of the book. It's looking, because they're two very different things. Power and strength are two very different things, and Inez is Addie's mother. And so Inez was the orphan out in Los Angeles in the 1930s, 40s, who has made her way back. She started a family, and in Addie's eyes, you know, she's home with her children. She doesn't have a job outside the home. She's never traveled anywhere as far as Addie knows. Addie sees her as just mom. But Inez is so much more, because Inez has committed her whole life in part to being there for Marilyn Monroe as Jean to them. And she she shows tremendous strength in the book, which I'm not going to talk
No,
about
we're not.
because we're going to
No.
give it away. But Addie comes to find her own strength, and Marilyn has power in the industry, of course, because she's a powerful person in some ways. She was also not so powerful being a woman in the industry at the time, but she also shows tremendous strength. The difference being strength is an act of character and integrity, and power from the powerful men in this book, it's gained through not ethical means. It's corrupt. Doesn't have to be corrupt, but this power is corrupt. So I really appreciate you raising that issue.
Well, they are two definitely different
Very
things,
different
power
things.
and strength. There is a scene that was so scary, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but it has to do with children and where one misstep could have ended in tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
As a writer, are you like just anxious to get to this place so you can let us have this, or do you have to show restraint when there are children whose lives are in the balance?
Sure. Well, I'm not one for gratuitous violence in my books. I'm more intrigued by creative thinkers. You know, if you're going to get out of a jam, you do it with your mind and not a big gun. So yeah, the children is of course a delicate balance, and suspense. I mean, for me, good suspense also unrolls slowly, but it never stops, and it gains speed. It's like the rock rolling down the hill, and it gains speed and it gains speed, because I want the readers reading through their laced fingers. So I don't want to say too much, but I'll just assure you that I take good care of the children in my work.
And you have to, it is that rolling along with this book, because when you started, you were going to want to read all the way to the end. I want to look at character development, if I could, because to me, the wicked ones must be the most fun to do.
Yeah.
Siebert Ricks. I mean, is it more challenging to write evil?
No. The thing about evil, and I learned this early on, is the bad guy doesn't think of himself as the bad guy. The evil person does not think of themselves, by and large, even if they know what they're doing is wrong, they feel justified. So again, it's finding the character and their mindset. And Siebert Ricks is a man who was nothing without Marilyn Monroe. And that makes for a dangerous person. And he knows, deep down, he'd never admit it to you, but deep down he knows he's nothing without her. He's her photographer. He's a totally fictional character. Another one that she met in childhood. And they've been connected ever since. So
Connected, and he has this hold on her.
And he has this hold on her. She feels that she owes him something because he was there taking pictures in the very beginning. And so, yeah, Siebert was fun to write. I like to see justice and comeuppance in the end.
And we'll see if that plays out.
And we'll see if that plays out for Siebert Ricks.
Everything fits into the book perfectly. I'm curious, how many different endings did you consider, or did you know when you started that this is how we're going to do it?
You know, I didn't know. A book can be a little bit of a runaway train on you when you get deep in that third act. And they've all been different, but with this book, I could not type fast enough. I wrote this faster than any book I've ever written. And I specifically remember writing the ending. I was sitting in my backyard, and I could hear my neighbor next door. He works from home, and I could hear him out on his patio. And I am just typing away, full on sobbing, as I'm writing the ending of this book. And that's the best way I can say is I just couldn't type fast enough.
That just gives me chills. Has that ever happened to you before?
No, and I would like it to happen with every book because but I think a lot about why, like, is there an answer to why it was that way? Can I learn something about how, you know, I don't know, the work that went into the character? I don't know why. I think that just, there are crazy mystical things that go on with a writer that I was started out as a tax accountant. So those sort of things that I can't explain, I don't like to get too close to them. They scare me a little bit, and I just roll with it.
Because Marilyn Monroe is front and central to this story, I know you did research. I know that you watched, I don't know how many of her movies. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite?
Oh, probably The 7-Year Itch. And I watched a lot of, or listened to a lot of interviews with Marilyn as well, and read some of her writings. There's a publication out there from a journal that she had, and she was an avid reader. She was an avid reader, and she wrote, and a lot of things that don't maybe fit in with the image of what people had of her. She was a very bright, curious person, very concerned with justice and equal rights at a time when not many people were, certainly not women, you know, and she used her position, I think, in as much as she could toward those ends.
So what we see of Marilyn, what we know, it's an act?
So a lot of what people think of, particularly from her movies or what they've heard of her, you know, the singing and we've all seen the famous Happy Birthday. It's the very breathy voice of Marilyn, and that was not her real voice. I went and searched, and it was kind of tough to find an example of her real voice, because in the book, I wanted to find Marilyn as just Jean. It's kind of this very artificial environment. So that's who I wanted to write. And in one of the interesting things in that research was that very breathy sort of voice came out of a struggle she had with stuttering. And that was suggested as a way to combat her stuttering. So yeah, and she, you know, she is an icon.
Absolutely.
You know, to this day, I don't know that there's anyone else that will have faced the issues she faced. And she was fascinating to write.
Laurie, I've known you since your very first book, Bent Road, since that was published. This is your 6th book, if I'm counting correctly.
Yes, this is 6.
How's the progression? Are you like totally comfortable now?
Oh no, no. I think the big thing I've learned as a writer is just to accept the way it works for me. It's not something you decide. It's not something you choose. It's a little bit like you write with your left hand or you write with your right hand. You don't choose that. That's just who you are. So my writing process is pretty haphazard. As much as I try to be organized, because I got that tax accountant still burning inside me, it's disorganized, it's chaotic. My office spins out of control until I finish a first draft, and then I clean it up.
This is nothing like I thought you would do. Do you write every day? Is there a routine? I mean,
I do. Especially when I'm writing a first draft, I'll have sort of a word count target, maybe 1,500 words, 2,000, because it's just fatiguing. You know, it's much like you can only run so far. You know, you get fatigued. When I'm editing, working on a second draft, rewriting, that I'll pretty much do all day. But it's every day, and it's you know, not every day is great, but you just power through them, and it's just a little bit at a time.
Is there a manuscript that's sitting in a drawer that's never seen the light of day?
Oh, there's a couple. Yeah. In fact, a couple of the really early ones, they got shredded when we moved about 5 years ago. I wanted no proof of them. But that's okay. That's just part of you got to start somewhere. So yeah, there's a couple.
You are successful. What does that feel like?
It's all about the story and the next book. So yeah, I've had the pleasure of some wonderful things happening with my work, but it's all about what's next.
And what is one thing that you would tell your younger self?
Start writing sooner. But I also never thought I was going to be a writer. I didn't grow up thinking maybe that's not realistic.
I don't know. We are so glad you're a writer.
Well, thank you.
Lori Roy's latest book is Lake County. It is extraordinary. As always, thank you so much, Lori.
Thank you for having me. Been great.
I'm Ann Bocock. Please join us on the next Between the Covers and check out new episodes on our podcast, Go Between the Covers.